So today I'll show you how I made this amazing model of Pooh Bear's house. This is a really easy build and it only took me about 3 days to make. So without any further waiting, let's continue with the video. To start off making the build, I created the Pooh Bear figurine out of clay. The clay I used was polymer clay. This clay is the best for making figurines because it never dries and you can bake it to make it super hard. As you see, I'm making the figurine out of black clay even though Pooh Bear is yellow. But that's because it's easier to paint over the clay to add more details, and because if the clay got burned, then you wouldn't have a problem because you could just paint over it. This here was the final product. After I made the figurine, I decided to start building on the house. Here's an image of Pooh Bear's house. He lives inside a tree with a house merged inside of it. The first thing I made was a door. To make the door, I cut popsicle sticks in half to make little boards that I could glue them back together and make a door. Cutting them in half wasn't too hard, you just gotta slice them and then break them in half. After I cut out the boards, I cut them even more to shape the door. To glue it together, I used super glue from the dollar store. Although super glue dries really fast, you might have to press it in for more than 10 seconds to keep it sticking. Then I finished it off with painting the door. Later on, I realized that the door isn't proportional to the Pooh Bear figure. But here on my channel, we don't really go for perfectionist. After that, I then started to build the actual tree. For the base, I used this water bottle sized log I found in the backyard. When making models, using the most natural things always give you the best results. Now I built that house that protrudes out of the tree. To build the house, I used cardboard. I didn't use any measurements for the house, I just used a glue gun and a cardboard box. I also made sure to cut out a window for the house. For the roof, I had to cut out individual cardboard scales to make the tiles on the roof. Although this took some time, it gave me better results than a flat roof. After the house was done, I painted it. For the walls, I painted it a really whitish brown, and for the tiles, I painted a reddish brown. To give the roof and walls more texture, I used a black wash. What a wash is basically a bunch of paint that's really diluted, so when you brush it over, it doesn't leave that much paint over. For these walls, I painted it over and wiped it off. This gave it more texture and made it look older than it is. Now it was time to build the actual tree. To combine the house and the door to the tree, I used some air dry clay. But of course I didn't use real air dry clay because I'm not an adult and I can't go anywhere and buy my own stuff, so I just used some homemade recipes. This recipe consists of flour and lotion. I don't know why it works, but that's all you really need. I used the clay to make root structures to connect the house and the door together with the tree. It also made the tree look more realistic because a tree isn't a stump that just comes out of the ground. It has more structures to it. To make the clay stick better to the log while I'm molding, I used water, which I rubbed over the clay to make it more sticky. Then I just shaped it and pressed everything together. Surprisingly, the clay has a good job of holding things together. Although the clay looks really out of place right now because it's white and the tree is brown, we'll paint over everything later so everything will blend nicely together. Now I needed to attach the branches of the tree. To do this, I just got a bunch of clay and put it on the top of the log. Then I stuck branches of dead bushes on the top. All of these are basically the branches of the tree. I try to put the branches as naturally as I can around the tree. I got these branches by strolling around the neighborhood and looking for dead bushes. Luckily, the local gardeners aren't really doing their job. While picking branches, try to look for a plant that has a lot of dense branch structures, which will give you better results. Afterwards, I coated everything with a glue called Mod Podge. You can get this glue at Walmart and it's really helpful in all your projects. I painted the Mod Podge over the structures of the tree that were made out of clay. The homemade clay wasn't too strong, so this helped strengthen the clay. I also painted Mod Podge over the branches where they connect with the clay. This is to make sure the branches actually stay on the tree. After that, I used some super glue to super glue on some branches on the side of the trunk where the clay wasn't present. After that, I trimmed the branches to make it look more natural. And finally, after all that work, I finally painted the tree. I used an orangish brown mix and I painted the whole entire tree. For the branches, I didn't paint all the branches, that would be too much of a hassle. Most people paint the whole entire tree with spray paint and then paint the house and the door. But I'm lazy, so yeah. I only painted the branches on the outside, which are most likely to be seen, so then it doesn't look really discolored. Now for the transformation, from making this look like a weird piece of crap into a tree. This step is actually pretty easy. All you need is some moss. This kind of moss I got it from Michael's for only $7. There's basically two types of moss, the ball clump moss and the more viney moss. Both of these mosses can be really helpful, but we'll be using the ball clump moss for now. What I did was I got some moss and some Mod Podge and I glued on the moss on the branches. This is pretty hard because glue isn't sticky when it's not dry. And then after a while, I was finished. The tree looks pretty good, doesn't it? But the problem was, I got a really big mess in the restroom. Now, the tree is almost done. After it was done drying, I added some more minor details, such as the ring also sign and the bell, and also the window thingy. I don't know what it's called, but it's a window thingy. Yeah. Although the moss makes a good tree, it doesn't make the best tree. This is because moss doesn't really look like leaves on a tree. It just looks like a bunch of fibers. So to make the tree look more realistic, I sprayed the moss on the tree with adhesive spray. This is basically a bunch of spray glue that's really sticky. Then I sprinkled on some Woodland Scenics fine ground foam. Woodland Scenics is basically a company that sells modeling supplies. And these foams are really helpful for making plants and bushes. But the downfall is that this stuff is very expensive, like oh my god, stupidly expensive. They sell this stuff called deadfall, which is used to model dead trees, but they're just a bunch of sticks and they cost $10, like whoa man. Anyways, you can buy this stuff at Hobby Lobby or online. After I'm done sprinkling on the foam, I spray it again with the adhesive to make everything stay. While I waited for that to dry, I made the base of the model. To do this, most people use wood, so that's what I'm going to be using. I placed the treehouse on the wood and then traced a rough circle around it. Then I cut the circle out using a scroll saw. A scroll saw is basically like a sewing machine, but instead of sewing, it cuts wood. This tool is very helpful for all kinds of projects. Then I sanded only the bottom part of the base. I'll tell you why I did this in a moment. Now it was time to make the terrain. For this I used plaster that I got from Hobby Lobby. As you see, when I was mixing it, I accidentally dropped some on the table. This is basically the main problem with plaster. Plaster is super hard to clean because once you wet it, it starts drying. That's why I chose to do it outside. I then put some plaster on the top side of the base. This is the reason I didn't sand it, because plaster doesn't stick well to smooth surfaces. I spread out some plaster on where the tree was going to be, and then I stuck the tree right on the plaster. The plaster is basically going to be the ground, so I blended the plaster with the tree so then it looked like the tree was growing out of the ground. I also tried to not get plaster on anything I don't want it to because it's really hard to clean. While the plaster dried, I also rubbed it to make it more smooth. This is a vital step for using plaster, and if you don't do it, then your ground is going to be very bumpy. For the path, I try to make it lower than the actual ground. This is to help emphasize the path. After I'm all done, I let it sit and dry. it's done drying, I use some sandpaper to sand the edges. This is to remove some overspilled plaster that might have fallen out. After the plaster is all tidied up, I painted it. Even though we'll cover it all up with dirt and other things, we still want a base color because if we miss a spot, then there'll be white showing through. I painted the grassy areas green and the path brown. Usually, you'll just paint it all brown and cover it with dirt. This is because ground is usually just made out of dirt. But since this is more of a cartoonish build, I just painted it green and covered it with ground foam. When I was done painting it, I took it back outside and brought my Mod Podge. I then mixed water with Mod Podge to make a diluted mix. Then I covered the model with the glue and sprinkled on all the foam. I also did this with the path. Since this ground foam is really expensive, I try to save as much as I can. For the path, I used a sifted mixture of dirt that I got from my backyard. Making the dirt more fine makes it look more miniature, like the scene. Then, to fix it all into place, I sprayed it with wet water. You probably don't know what wet water is, but it's basically just dishwashing soap and water. A guy named Luke Towan made this recipe, and you should really check out his videos on more modeling tips. In his video, you learn the uses of wet water and the purpose of it. Basically, we're gonna have to spray diluted Mod Podge on top of the scenery, but wet water helps the Mod Podge soak into the ground foam. So I sprayed it with wet water and then Mod Podge. Just make sure you clean the spray bottle after using it, because if the glue dries in the nozzle, then you're not gonna have a spray bottle anymore. To further secure it, I used an eyedropper and then put more diluted Mod Podge on it. This is right after I sprayed it, so I didn't really have to add any more wet water. Although the glue seems really white right now, later on it'll dry clear. Since that took a really long time to dry, I decided to make some honey pots for Pooh Bear. This helps show that this is actually Pooh Bear's house and not just a random house he's at. And we all know Pooh Bear has that honey addiction.
I think you know the way, Mr. Honey Addicted Man.
Now it's the more fun part. Time for adding plants and bushes. For the bushes, I got them from Woodland Scenics, and for the plants, I got fake plants from Michaels and Hobby Lobby. Unlike everything else, the fake plants aren't that expensive, and they make really good plants and last really long. I glued in the bushes with Mod Podge and the fake plants with super glue. Then I added the campfire and the log in front of Pooh Bear's house. And I put Pooh Bear sitting on the log. As you see, Pooh Bear isn't that proportional to the building, but it's pretty good. Now we're basically done. All I had to do was add the pots, and then I painted the sides of the diorama to make it more professional. And there you go, the model is basically done.
How do you think of the model?
In my opinion, this model turned out really great, and this is only the third time I ever made a model. Modeling is a really fun hobby, and it makes you look at the world in a better way. Modeling shows you how hard it is to recreate something from nature, and it makes you value nature more than ever. Anyways, thank you all for watching the making of this model. If you like this model, please comment or subscribe to tell me your feedback. And thank you all for watching.